And I don't have visibility into who's online or not in the questions. And so Dave, I think, is going to chime in towards the end for Q&A. I know this is a really super short session, so I'm just going to fly through just kind of a high level view of what we're doing. And but I'm going to not mention 1,000 other things. So maybe just catch up with me later today. There's also some other folks here from Graphite too. We can have lunch or dinner or whatever. So my name is Preston Lee, CTO for Graphite Labs, which is the developer facing portion of Graphite Health. We are a, oh, does that work? Okay, not the latency isn't too bad. So we are a coalition of healthcare systems that have come together to build actual production quality interoperability solutions. And we're doing a ton of work in the standardization space and have kind of this broader, longer term vision that I'm going to share with you. Our current members are Kaiser Permanente, Intermountain Healthcare, Presbyterian, SSM, and they were growing rapidly. There's still a number of board seats that have opened. We aren't necessarily going to have a board completely driven by healthcare systems. It's just at, oh, there goes. But at present, the board is healthcare systems. And if you go to the graphitehealth.io website, you'll see kind of this hand wavy type marketing diagram on the right-hand side. It effectively boils down to a underlying data integration platform. And so we're set up as a not-for-profit. And when we're not like this VC backed like for-profit enterprise that's really just trying to bring our platform into every healthcare system. We're a bit different than that. When members join, where members as large health systems join Graphite, part of that is a commitment to actually implement runtime normalization standards for applications to access data in a normalized and heavily standardized pre-coordinated basis. So we were founded and we're operationalizing a lot of the gaps that exist between what organizations like HL7 and the FHIR community do and what large healthcare systems actually need to have to implement those things in practice. And so we're building the stuff on the right side. Long-term, our operational model is based on the idea of a vendor agnostic application marketplace for health IT. Personally, this has been an area that I've worked in for a long time and I'm very passionate about. Our stack also includes like an application runtime layer in between both of that data integration tier and this high level marketplace to be able to support this write once, run anywhere type of model that most developers would prefer when it comes to selling their applications in practice. A couple disclaimers. First of all, we literally just launched last year. So we are very new. Like I said, our board is not completely full yet. And so no one can honestly predict exactly how the dynamics will change as that occurs. We are growing staff rapidly. And so for the foreseeable future, that's just going to continue to happen. And so there is a little bit of shrugging still at this point, just because we're so new and that we don't have all of the technical answers yet into how we're going to do some of these things. But nevertheless, I think it's pretty compelling. One of my observations from kind of living in this gap between, hey, Stan. Oh, I don't have that box on my machine. Oh. Yeah. I'll let him deal with that. Does that work? Okay. All right, so just kind of a crude observation that, and this is an example where, and it's not a dig on Smart on Fire or the FHIR community or anything like that, but, when you actually try to operationalize like a simple app, these, one screen, visualizer type chart, UIs that connect to a single FHIR data store and just read data. I mean, these things don't really exist so cleanly in practice. Now you can go to the galleries of the EMRs and see a bunch of apps, but realistically, there's no one-click button to install that and run that. And part of the reason is, the majority of these apps, even if they're intended to be launched as smart apps, typically have some sort of underlying storage that they need for data that isn't going to be written back to the medical record. So it could be something as simple as user preferences, like, does the user prefer a dark or light theme on the app? There could be authentication information. There could be licensing information on their specific subscription tier of the app. There could be cybersecurity issues where there's a specific idiosyncratic way that the app needs to integrate. I mean, the real world is a lot dirtier than just OAuth authorization and some scopes and just kind of, doing FHIR APIs calls back and forth. So, to that degree, the healthcare systems, and this is, I'm getting a connecting, oh my gosh, the Wi-Fi went down on my machine. When it rains, it pours. The DevDays 22 access has not been great up here. And this doesn't work without slides. All right, switching to cellular. I'm going to cross my fingers. And I'm back on T-Mobile this time. Okay. All right. So at HIMSS this year, we put together this kind of conceptual overview of what we're trying to achieve from a healthcare system standpoint, where the healthcare systems want to be able to, download, install, evaluate, license, bill. They want an experience similar to the consumer app stores work, like on your mobile device, where you just try it, and if you like it, you subscribe to it, as opposed to the 12 months to sometimes 36 months or longer sales cycles of actually getting your simple one-page app into production use at a single healthcare system with further customization because of all those idiosyncrasies that come along with data access. And licensing, and the lawyers get involved. It's just messy. So I can do a more detailed walkthrough of that at a later point, but that's more from a healthcare system perspective. Now to app developers, and so especially for the FHIR DevDays community, this has all the spoilers on the right-hand side because it's not full screen. You didn't see that. No, Phil. Yeah, so one of the major, like probably the number one, and these aren't ordered, but number one thing developers bring up when I kind of give them this graphite pitch is, first of all, the massive data inconsistencies across different instances of the EMRs, and all of the people wanting to know exactly how we're going to deal with this specific use case. And but at a high level, philosophically, what we're trying to achieve is data normalization. And so that underlying runtime tier that we're providing, we want application developers to not have to worry so much about all of those minor differences, and simply provide a complete and open access set of FHIR profiles, and what we call application profiles at the software level, to be able to write your application and worry less about how it's actually going to get orchestrated into production. Because time is so immensely short. I only have 10 minutes, don't I? Time check. 12 minutes. Okay. A lot of data, just because it's available in the EMR doesn't mean it's available directly by a direct REST API call. And so, but at the same time, you might want to write a web app, but you also need a bunch of middleware to be able to receive data from a V2 feed, and then kind of massage that into a way, that you can access via REST, and probably using JSON. So there's just a ton of middleware that ends up being created, even if you're doing a simple Smart on FHIR launch. We are orienting ourselves very heavily towards FHIR and REST APIs, and trying to put FHIR layers on top of some of the messiness underneath. We are not going to compete with or try to replace the EMRs and all the proprietary APIs, the site-specific APIs that end up getting written. Rather than that, we're seeing ourselves very complementary, and intend to work with EMRs as closely as possible, and instead focus on compatibility certification. If I get to it, I have some slides on that. Reduction of sales cycles by being able to deploy your applications on demand. Everybody wants to own the platform. It's just mind-blowing how every ISV that's a product company aspires to someday have their own runtime platform and solution. And this can be pretty irritating to healthcare systems, because you can't just buy a simple app. Like, you have to suck in all this other stuff from a developer. So we have this concept called application profiles, which is conceptually, it's kind of similar to the way FHIR profiles work, but again, at that software application level. And so if you have a kind of 1990s style, requires Windows 98 to run your Cold Fusion app, that's probably not something that's going to work with Graphite. You may just want to keep doing what you're doing. However, if your business has a product that fits within this probably 80% category of application types that are centered around FHIR, we're intending to provide these very specific profiles of how to package your application so that we can do it in an automated manner. Cybersecurity, if you ever sold an application to a large healthcare enterprise, really any large enterprise, there's a fairly brutal cybersecurity assessment that always goes along with it. There's many vendors who specialize in it. Sensinet and HITrust are two of them. There's kind of open efforts to do the same. So we view this as kind of part of Graphite's responsibility to certify apps prior to getting published in Graphite's marketplace. So we prefer that when an application is submitted by an ISV, that it comes all with a pre-populated set of those common cybersecurity controls. And for us, we're specific to the US market. But the member health systems, when they join Graphite, there's kind of that implicit agreement to coordinate on those cybersecurity controls. And so you don't end up having to re-engineer your product because this particular member wants you to download all of your JavaScript assets from their CDN. This other one doesn't allow CDNs. We're putting in the common controls around some of those underlying engineering decisions. Procurement and billing, it's very difficult for your customers to figure out how much your app really costs. So the TCO calculation is just incredibly difficult. It's not just the licensing that's involved in it. Typically, in general terms, like the long-term human maintenance costs tend to dwarf the actual licensing costs of an application. And so we're trying to bring some commonality to the way that product licensing is also done in practice so that we can automate it and put together consolidated billing statements for healthcare systems to actually understand how much your app is costing them. And then last but not least is this high barrier to entry, quick time check, that it's very difficult, especially as a small to medium business doing healthcare software, to break into the market. And so by, let's get on full screen. So we're aiming to provide an SDK level resource that lowers that barrier to entry, not just from a technical perspective, but to provide those application level profiles and a workflow so that you actually have a concrete target to work towards when you start designing and building your application. And then simultaneously, for existing software shops that have products, we intend to make that same flow common so that you can just port or make adjustments to your application to use these Graphite conventions that, again, all of our member health systems we will be implementing kind of on the back end side, so that when you submit your app and you receive that kind of stamp that states, you have used, the specific US core-based way of representing blood pressure and vital signs and patient demographics and stuff, that you have a good level of assurance that it's actually going to work across our members when they license it. This is kind of the culmination of everything on the previous slide, is our vision of how software publication works through Graphite, which is very small on the screen. It's intended to be a poster. The first step, well, overall, it looks very similar to the way that direct-to-consumer marketplaces work. So if you've ever developed a product for Apple or Google Play or Amazon, there's kind of there's a lot of commonalities across those flows internationally. The different app stores have some variations. First of all, for us, it means joining Graphite as a developer as part of our ISV program. I think I mentioned we're going to make as much available in an open way as possible when it comes, especially when it comes to like information and FHIR profiles. To us, and as not a commercial entity that's intending to like own, own all of the IP, especially around information modeling, getting access to that. This middle portion here is really the bulk of the activities from the developer standpoint. The first is just making sure that when you do use FHIR APIs, that it's not at the level of use FHIR or use LOINC codes, but we have to address those specific ways, like which specific LOINC codes do you use in this case. So you could kind of say there's an analogy to an IG, but we're not trying to address just 12 different use cases in an IG level. We're trying to address like a significant portion of what health IT applications have to functionally do in production. There are some differences. There are some sticky points. For example, adding the ability to configure a product at runtime. When you submit a product to app or to Graphite, you can't bake in knowledge of your customer in advance. You might have 0 customers in advance. So there's things like FHIR capability statements, which are a little problematic for us, and we're working towards finding resolution to that. Testing your application, packaging it, I'm going to accelerate just due to time here, is all part of that initial experience from from an ISV perspective, when you start engaging with Graphite, the certification and publication process is expected to be more onerous than it would be if you're publishing a direct-to-consumer application. And that is by choice. And my argument is that that's actually to your benefit as well, because we're front loading as much of that pain as we can, especially in cybersecurity assessment, to get it out of the way so that we have common agreement by the time your application is even published. And by doing so, we can support those types of use cases like push to click deployment, zero configuration evaluation in a sandbox environment where the prospective customer can try your application using synthetic data prior to ever signing, a license agreement. So it's just a different model. And then lastly, the ability to realize revenue using that same unified billing mechanism is, I feel, a massive benefit to developers as well, because it's a very similar model, again, as like the direct-to-consumer type app stores pursue. Because of time, I'm just going to stop there and maybe just open for some questions. And Dave, if
Hi. Going back, actually, I think it was your very first slide or the second slide. You had the layers, and you had that Graphite interoperability platform, standardization platform. So I'm trying to understand if there's certain software that these different partners like are required to run within their environments. Is there something on that?
Short answer is just yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what it is at this point?
Yeah, I mean, and part of our challenge, and as well as our benefit to developers, is that, if you just look at the second bullet point, I mean, there's a tremendous difference between the infrastructure that each of these healthcare systems have. Kaiser is well, I'm not sure what I can disclose about internally about the way you operate, but suffice to say, they're different EMRs. They use completely different underlying data models. And there is a significant commitment when each of these entities joins Graphite in that onboarding process, because it's not an easy road. And there are certain, I mentioned that principle of trying to front load a lot of that pain. And so we've kind of taken it upon ourselves to do that, with the end goal that those common FHIR profiles in our case will already be implemented in the customer environment by the time you deploy your application.
Very interesting stuff. Where are you in the journey here with Graphite?
Fairly early. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, and especially what we presented at HIMSS, I mean, it is a bit hand wavy in that we've done some prototyping. We're continuing to do that. We're working with some of these members more than others, just from their level of existing sophistication and expectation. What I would love people to do right now, and thank you for prompting this, is to just go to the graphitehealth.io website and sign up to provide early SDK feedback. We are not dropping some massive release today. It's not going to be in the imminent future. But as we start to incrementally provide like the intricacies or the innards of what we think Graphite SDK will be like, we need to get that hardcore developer level feedback on if what we're doing is really going to be feasible as we scale to hundreds of different apps to thousands of different apps in the future.
So we're pretty much at time. If you do have additional questions, anyone can add them to the Whova Q&A chat or the Q&A channel or that section. And then I'll prompt Preston to check that out in Whova, and he can always answer those in the Q&A section. The good thing about those is they stay for days and weeks on end, so you can always log back into Whova and see the questions and answers there. Anything else, Preston?
Million things. Yeah.
All right, well, we are at time, so